Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Aimee Brown and Rachael Salter, who are both consultants with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk DP. So today we're going to be talking about DSARs, redaction, context, and the calls that can make or break compliance. So just to start things off, guys, can you tell me why redaction is the part of DSAR handling that so often goes wrong for organisations?
You've most of the time got people who are not specifically trained to do this, doing this. And so, as I said, knowledge is one of the big impacts of that, because they don't have that in-depth information that they need to know what is personal data, what's direct, what's indirect, what identifies an individual. And so they struggle to distinguish that, and then also putting a contextual bit to it as well. Where does that content identify that person? Does that content then make that information difficult to understand for the requester or the data subject? What falls in and out of the scope? Mixed data where there's more than one individual, how do you apply that personal data and identifiable data when you're looking at mixed data? It's really complex, and if you've not got the right training in place, then it can be really, really difficult.
And one of the other things as well, like Aimee just said about, the context around the data set is so important. We deal with a number of DSARs from housing associations, and where some clients use tools to redact names from the data set. That's all well and good until the data says something like the neighbour next door but one, or the flat above, or her next door. That's not anyone's name, but that is by context telling someone who has put in the subject access or who's made the complaint about them, or if it's something to do with antisocial behaviour. So, it needs a human. It needs a human constantly. It needs time. And I think, like Aimee said, lack of knowledge is really important, because whilst we have ICO guidance around what is personal data and in terms of a DSAR and what needs to stay and what needs to go, there isn't really many courses to train people to do this. It's something you really learn on the job. It's something that evolves over time. There's no real hymn sheet. We can say take out third-party names, addresses, telephone numbers, and people can do that. But when you reread the paragraph, is the context still there? Have you removed the other identifiable factors like she or he or her or him or something like that, where literally there's another identifier that can bring you back. It's not just someone's name that will identify someone, making it personal data. So it's not an easy role. It's a really difficult task, and it's something you learn over time. And we have conversations. URM run a course around. We do an intense day on DSAR training, and to try and encourage disclosure officers to have confidence to make decisions around some of the things that they need to do. And when we do the test around what is personal data, everybody around the table has a different view. Even though the ICO tells us what personal data is, it can move. The scope can change depending on what else you know. And that's really important, isn't it, Aimee? Like around the context of what you already know about something or what someone else already knows. So taking someone's name out might not be enough to take someone's identity out. Yeah. So the personal data itself is not always, taking the name out is not always enough. So It's complex. Everything's a case-by-case basis too. So there's no blanket approach to this. That's why it takes time.
You're constantly learning as well. We quite often will get in touch with each other and go, right, I've got this case. This is the info. Can you just look at it? Or we'll do a second pass just to make sure with the complex ones that it is done right. Because even though we've both been doing this for years, each case can throw things up that you've never come across before, or just that additional complexity that can really change it. And if you look at, there was a case with Ashley versus HMRC. You look at an organisation as large as HMRC with probably how many DSARs that they would receive on a constant basis, and yet still they got it wrong. They didn't do things right. They didn't search properly. They over-redacted. They missed systems. They dealt with their departments as different controllers and tried to keep it all separate. Yeah. And they really, really got it wrong. when you look at big organisations like that getting it wrong, then you think, well, how easy is it then for little organisations to get it wrong?
Absolutely.
When people who are meant to be doing it, all of the time, because HMRC are going to have hundreds.
Yeah, you would have thought they would have invested in that knowledge in their people, wouldn't you? And there's some basic things they got wrong there that they should have known better about. But I guess a number of organisations are still learning even now after 2018. They should have been doing these for a long, long time. And I think now with GDPR, we're 8 years in. We should be all professionals at this now. But I think maybe with staff turnover, budget cuts and things that are happening in society, they're not getting the right people in the right roles or investing enough in them in terms of training to give them the power and the tools to do a good job on this.
It's also quite often a secondary role as well, isn't it? It's not their normal business as usual job. It's not their normal day-to-day role. It's secondary. So one of my clients, the two people who mainly deal with all of the data protection stuff, it's not their first role. It's not their main job. Therefore, they don't necessarily get the right training. They don't necessarily have the experience and qualifications that you need to understand all of those nuances and the finer details. And that's where you can really find the holes. That's where that lack of knowledge can really come in and bite you.
And also as well, when it's your second job and, your emails are coming in constantly, you've got the phone ringing off the hook, you've got to concentrate on this. It's really important. You've got to really focus. Like Aimee said, that it's very often one of us I'll send something to Aimee and go, run your eyes over this, second pair of eyes. Would you do the same way as I did? And vice versa. We often double check each other's work and say, do you know what? This one's a little bit contentious. Read it and tell me what you would do. And we might have a different view, and that's healthy, to do that and to have those discussions around what we leave in and what we don't. And maybe when you ask someone else who sits outside of this, who doesn't know any of the context at all, to read it, it's like a temperature test, it's like a dip sample, and it's good to get that second view. But the thing about having it as a second role is the time restriction is a real problem, because you've got to fit a DSAR in what is technically 20 working days. A month is only 20 working days. You've got your annual leave in there. You've got any potential sickness. You've got other people off on leave, and you've got your own job to do. So the time pressure is enormous. And as Aimee said about over redaction as well, it's very easy to black out a whole page and leave a sentence in it. And that's a huge problem. The ICO is really clamping down on over redaction. You need to leave some context in for the data subject. They need to have a clue what that sentence is in relation to. There's no point just leaving something with someone's name and thinking that's enough. So I think there's a lot of nervousness around it. So it's like, let's redact everything and we'll just leave everything with that person's name in. Well, that's not enough, And again, this comes down to training. It comes down to years of experience and knowledge. It's a big pressure. It's a big pressure for any organisation.
I mean, volume's a really big one, as you just said. We've had a case recently where there was 49,000 emails that needed to be reviewed, not just by a piece of software that could look for specific information, but actually reviewed by human eyes. And 49,000 emails is months and months worth of work to try and get down to what is actually needed. And at the end of the day, the data subject or the requester will only get a small portion of that, but you can't rely particularly when it comes to the personal data context of what's in the body of the email. You can't just rely solely on a system to scan through that and pull out what you get rid of and what you keep. And then another thing is what you're using software-wise. I mean, you might end up with an unreliable software that when it scans documents, you've got photographs or handwritten notes or things like that. If you're not using good enough software, then it could miss some of those searches for that data subject because it might not recognize characters and things like that. It might not convert it properly. So actually, even when you are doing your redaction over the top, it doesn't layer properly and things can appear. And then where your data is held on your systems as well can also be a problem. If you've got unstructured data, that can make your searches even harder.
One of the key things, though, and we say this, almost daily to clients, is stop holding information longer than you need it. The more you retain on your systems, the more that's got to come out in a DSAR. Don't keep records longer than you need. It's so important. I mean, it's a breach of a principle for a start from a GDPR perspective. But that aside, keeping your house in order will pay dividends in the long run when it comes to a subject access request. Don't hold employee records for 25 years. Why would you do that? Someone then comes back later and that's months and months of work. Set yourself realistic timeframes on how long you need to retain information for. Email retention is the biggest bugbear, I think, because like Aimee says, often when we get people come to us, clients come to us when they've got a real problem. They've got a very difficult subject access request. They've run a search of their systems using something like Purview, and they've pulled up 270,000 emails, and they panic because and it's like, why have you got that many emails that have still got that person's name in it? Why are you retaining this? Why are you retaining emails that say, it's my birthday today, there are cakes in the kitchen, and 2,000 people are copied in on the email? That means there's that many copies of it in the system. So, get your retention schedule in order, reduce the amount of data that you're storing and collecting, and it will pay dividends in the long run. I mean, we've seen it. We look back at data and say, why have you still got this? Why have you still got these emails that are this old, that are not relevant? But the fact is, a human has to sit and sift through this and read it. So it's taking time, it costs money. That's the other thing. The financial burden of a DSAR is enormous on an organisation, isn't it, Aimee? I mean, we know we can take weeks and throw tons of resource at a DSAR for a client. It costs thousands. But the law says this person's entitled to their information, so you have to comply. So it does pay to be better at your other admin and to reduce those numbers down in the long run and save time and money.
So how should reviewers distinguish between personal data, mixed data, and information that shouldn't be disclosed?
I think the first thing is have a really structured policy that sets out what is classed as personal data, what exemptions are, what thresholds are, so that your staff who are dealing with these DSARs have a really good handbook that they can refer to should anything come up, should any questions arise, that they can then rely on, that's also kept up to date to move with new technologies or any regulatory changes. And we've just had the DSAR last year come into effect, with changes still spanning across until later this year. So you need to update with those changes as they happen. That will really help your staff who are doing the DSARs know what they're meant to be doing.
Yeah, and if they've got a good comprehensive record of processing activity, or a ROPA as we know it as, it will help them to identify what personal data is held on what systems. So when they're looking through, they'll be able to distinguish, well, this system here, this platform's likely to contain personal data, this system here is likely to contain special category data. So maybe like from an employment perspective, things like health records, sick notes, things like that, occupational health type appointments around your employees when they're sick, or someone with a disability or something. So it's important that you've got a full register of what you've got and where it is on the system. And, like what stays in and what goes out, that can be really subjective. The ISO gives us guidance on what we can and can't take out. And there are some caveats in there. I often have conversations with clients around data that they want to remove from a bundle or redact from a document because it contains someone else's name. But actually, if the data subject is part of that email chain, they already know all of this information. They're already part of that chain. They've already read that email with that person's name in it. So why are you wasting valuable time redacting or removing something that the data subject already knows exists? So there are a number of things in the legislation that allow us to be a bit more flexible. But I think there's a lot of nervousness around leaving third-party information in, isn't there, Aimee?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's the risks of that third party. We've got a couple of clients who go on the blanket approach that their employees are redacted, even if that ex-employee was once part of that conversation on email and they were in the CC or the to from, those staff names still get removed, because in some industries your risk can be too great to those staff members, especially if the data subject decides to start publishing that information publicly. And not just staff members, customers, clients, if they decide that they're going to put those people's names online and any identifying information that they have about them, what's the risk to that? So that individual. So it is a really fine balancing test. So the nervousness is understandable in some industries and some circumstances. But in others, it can be a real waste of time that you're sitting redacting names that don't need redacting, especially if that data subject has got a copy of personal things that have gone to personal email addresses, for example, or they forwarded on to themselves, just no.
They've already got it, haven't they?
Yeah, they've already got it. They've got the copy.
Time. Yeah. And like Aimee just said there, around some of the clients having a blanket approach, our view on this is very, very similar to the ICO's view, and that is that this is a risk-based approach. So when you are redacting third-party information, you think to yourself, what's the risk if I leave this in? What would be the risk if this was seen by somebody that shouldn't see it, or it was left on the tube, or it was published on social media? And like in some of Aimee's examples, she just said, housing officers are a real target. Very disgruntled tenants may find out information about a housing officer from a disclosure, and then suddenly they're being targeted and terrible things are happening to them. They're being persecuted and tracked on, whatever it might be. But we take a risk-based approach. Sometimes I look at some DSARs and I go through and I think, well, this person already knows all of this. That person was sat in the same meeting as them. So it's, let's say it's a grievance meeting and there were 4 people in the meeting. Why am I redacting through other people's information out? This person knows they were there. They all sat together and had that conversation. They've probably all got a copy of the minutes. So when it comes to a DSAR, why are we wasting time? What's the risk of that person finding out who the other 3 people were? Well, they already knew. So, and I think, and Aimee, you can elaborate on this. I think everything around the GDPR, everything around privacy is around risk. Yeah. What is the risk to the data subject of something happening? What happens to this person if this is released? And we make those decisions, risk-based decisions every day, don't we, Aimee, when we're doing disclosures? And we predominantly get that right, because the ICO gives us really good guidance on risk and understanding risk. So third parties can stay in if we think the risk is so minimal to them. Why would we take them out? Why would we waste valuable time redacting it when we don't need to?
Yeah, protecting that person's rights and freedoms. Is it reasonably known? And what is the risk to the individual if that information is released? Are the 3 questions that you should be asking every time you come across that third-party data.
There's a lot of confusion as well over legal professional privilege, isn't there, Aimee?
Yeah.
What can and can't stay in from a legal professional privilege perspective? That's an exemption under the legislation that allows us to omit certain documentation and conversations from the disclosure bundle because it's protected because of the legal advice that's being given by your legal professionals, your solicitors. We get this quite a lot with HR type disclosures, don't we, Aimee?
Yeah.
Where they're dealing with maybe an ex-employee who is potentially making a claim against the organisation for unfair dismissal, for example, and it's likely that the organisation has consulted their specialist HR lawyers around their approach. Well, those conversations are protected. Even the ICO can't ask to see those. They're legally protected even from them as the regulator. So there's a number of exemptions that allow us, that give us some framework, don't they, Aimee, to help us to make decisions on what stays and what goes.
Yeah, they absolutely do. But again, referring back to the Ashley versus HMRC, the legal professional privilege exemption was over applied in that particular case. Yeah. And the case law that's come from that case that now helps us to apply the GDPR is that exemptions must be narrowly applied and with the clear justification. So, if the ICO comes in and audits that DSAR and looks at why those exemptions were applied, you should be able to justify them or have a record of the justification as to why they've been applied and where they've been applied, rather than just write any lawyer. Anything that from our lawyers at this address is removed has to be looked at again.
It's specific, doesn't it? Specific to that case, specific to that person or individual. Yeah, blanket approaches just don't work in the legislation at all, do they? There's no such thing as a blanket approach, and that's why each DSAR is individual and unique, isn't it? Because you have to deal with each one on a case-by-case basis, and that's why it's so hard to train this. Because like a lot of things in law, it's black and white. The legislation says this, so it's this or that. But actually, the GDPR is a little bit grey. There's a few grey areas, which allows you to make decisions on whether something stays or goes, whether it's redacted or not, what you're going to disclose or not. And that's the tricky thing, because each individual reading that could potentially take a completely different view, because we're all different. And that's why Aimee and I consult quite a bit. So we'll say, I would leave this in, what would you do? And she'd maybe review and go, actually, I'd take it out. And then we'd have that debate around it. And there's no real right or wrong. We just thrash that out and say, well, what would your view be? What's the risk if we did this? What's the risk if we did that? And that's, we sort of share our experiences and our knowledge over the years and say, well, what do we think we should or shouldn't do with it?
And that's healthy to have within your business as well. So even if you have a team who often come and do these things within your HR team or within another area of your business, is to have regular get-togethers, have case studies where you look at them and go, right, what would we all do? How do we all sing from the same hymn sheet? How do we all make sure that we all understand these exemptions, how to apply them, where to apply them, when to apply them, and what the personal data is. Keep examples when you come across something a bit different, so that when you've got these get-togethers, then you can use them to learn from, so that you've got that consistency across the board.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like I say, you were do this 1 day intense DSAR course, and I did one for an organisation a couple of weeks ago where I had 3 individuals from one particular organisation, the same organisation. So it was great for them because it was almost like an in-house course for them, and we could talk quite openly about some of their actual cases. And I give them an exercise to do where we have to redact the same document, all of us. So four of us approach this document together, and all 4 of us redacted it in a completely different way. And that's not unusual.
No.
That's perfectly normal. And then we had discussion around, well, what would we do with this and that? And what is interesting about it is what in each individual's risk appetite is. So someone on the course was really risk averse, and everything came out, because there was a lot of nervousness around it. And then others were a little bit more relaxed and laid back and went, well, actually, maybe this person already knows this, and started to make assumptions. And what you can see is how people get the confidence to make decisions around what stays and what goes. There's a lot of nervousness around things like management forecasts and any corporate information being disclosed in DSARs. You've got to be really careful about competitors getting hold of that. So you've got a number of exemptions that allow for that type of information to come out. But a lot of organisations don't realise they're allowed to do that. So they leave in forecasts and salary sheets and accounts paperwork, unless it's published out on on Companies House, for example, on your financial records, your director pay, that's not publicly known, so you're able to remove that from the bundle. But again, it's a lack of knowledge, I think, around what can stay and what can go.
Can you talk us through some of the biggest challenges when handling DSARs that involve unstructured data sets like email chains, chat logs, or call notes?
Just run for the hills, because the minute you do that search and 250,000 emails come back, you just pack a suitcase and just keep walking. It's really tough, isn't it, Aimee, to start narrowing down and organizations have data everywhere, Teams, chats, DMs, Slack channels, all sorts of places.
Yeah. So messy, and that's where your manpower is going in to review those volumes, those duplications of threads of emails where you've got 30 replies, and branches where it branches off because somebody replies to not the latest email, they reply to 2 before. It can get really, really complex and really messy when it's not structured and when you've not got a good retention policy. So you've got these emails going back for 15, 20 years and unnecessarily.
Yeah, crazy, isn't it, really? I mean, there's some obviously some really good sort of e-discovery type software that we work with a number of clients who use Purview, and the basic Purview package, the cheaper end of the scale, we'll do a search on some keywords for you and it will pull back what it can pull back. But the advanced Purview is very clever. So what it does is it looks at duplicate emails. It starts to look at the email chain. And whilst we would approach, so Aimee and I would probably approach it and go, okay, there's 9 copies of that email. Let's go to the latest one. You'd assume that's got everything in it, wouldn't you? But not necessarily. So all 9 of the chain have to be read to decide, well, can we get rid of those 8? Or like Aimee says, do they digress off and start talking about something else? And do they need to be included or don't they? But Purview is very clever. It can look at that duplication for you. So there are some clever pieces of software out there that can help to look at duplication of emails and help you to sort of identify what should and shouldn't stay. If you're doing it manually, it's a human intervention. It's reading every email and it's understanding the email chain and getting quick and good at that, because that's what takes the time.
Yeah,
just sifting and filtering everything. That's It's hard work, isn't it?
Yeah. I think with the other thing about emails and chats is people put opinions in there, informal remarks. They're using nicknames. You've got pictures, you've got emojis, you've got all kinds of different types of data in there that can, in the end, can constitute personal data, but can make the review trickier and more complex. Because you've got to understand that context, as we keep going back to the context of it. You've got to understand that. And is that identifiable for that person? Does that emoji of rolling eyes, is that aimed at that person? Is that informal remark actually about that person? Because yes, they're not in the email chain, and let's say it's a chat, for example. They've been mentioned 4 or 5 messages earlier, their actual name's been mentioned, but then you've got to check that chat chain is actually about that person, and that can make it really, really difficult.
Yeah, and like Aimee says, the rolling eyes emoji gets used such a lot, and I mean, is that a derogatory comment towards somebody? If somebody's going through a grievance, or they feel they're being bullied in the workplace, and suddenly they get a copy of a DSAR with that in, somebody's rolling their eyes at their comment, is that seen as a bullying tactic? Is that seen as some sort of comment towards them? It's really tricky. And this comes back to, I think we spend a lot of time telling clients to remind their teams to be professional all the time, because whatever you're saying or doing, the lol at the end of a message, or sort of some funny face, or some zippy comment could be basically suggesting you have an opinion on something or someone, or maybe their work, or maybe something they just said. And just remind people how that could be interpreted. I always say to all my clients, if you weren't prepared to walk up to that person and say that to their face, don't put it in a text, don't put it in a message, don't put it in a Teams, because at some point in the future, they're going to read it. And ultimately as well, if we flip that on its head, I often say to people who are putting in a DSAR, be careful what you ask for, be careful what you wish for, because when you get this DSAR back, the people you've worked with for the last 10 years are not necessarily your friend. And what could come out of the disclosure may be something that's quite hurtful. And someone that you've worked with for a long time, who you thought you were close to, may have been saying things in emails about you that you didn't know. And once you put in your subject access request, you're about to find out. So it can be swings and roundabouts, can't it, Aimee? Because, at some point, someone generally gets very upset about what comes out. Nobody puts in a subject access request for a good reason.
No, there's always a dispute behind it, isn't there? Or some kind of something going on that makes them need it. And then you've also, if you think that you're going to take it out of scope by not putting it on email, but putting it on WhatsApp, on your business device, or your personal use device that you've brought into the business to use for business, then that goes into scope as well. And you can't hide from it. So don't put it in writing if you don't want them to know.
Yeah, that's a great point as well, Aimee, actually, that around what's in scope in terms of devices, because I've spoken to a number of clients who say, oh, yeah, well, we use WhatsApp, but it's my own personal phone, so I don't have to disclose that. But you are expected to use that for work, right? So you're expected to pick up your work emails, pick up your work calls. Yes, well, that just brought your mobile phone into scope. So the ICO is very clear on that. So don't think that you can have those conversations on different devices, And I have 2 mobile phones, one's my personal device, one's my work device. If I wanted to send Aimee a message outside of scope, I'd send it on my personal device so that she gets it on her personal device. We wouldn't do that on our work mobiles, because we know that as DSAR professionals, we know that at some point that's likely to come out. So we wouldn't want that. But again, that's a lack of education around what's in scope and what isn't, from a DSAR perspective. But WhatsApp, Slack channels, and Teams, I think what tends to happen with these is people get complacent in the workplace and they forget that's their work device and that they're meant to be being professional. So they slip into just using it like their personal DMs, and it isn't. And you have to remind people to be very careful with that. But rather being unstructured, it's literally everywhere, and it's so time consuming. And you might see some crossover between email and Teams, and you've got to get all that bulk together. It's just so manual, isn't it, Aimee? That's the thing. It takes so long.
And that's before you even consider handwritten notes and meetings. Yeah.
And day books, those of us that still use day books.
To-do lists.
And what about people who have things like Remarkable or notepads and, iPads, and they're writing on them? And, if you're writing about someone in a meeting, that's in scope. And people just think, oh yeah, all they want is just emails. No, there's so much more. CCTV, access control logs with your swipey when you walk in and out of the building. There's so many things where data sits, and it's everywhere. It's almost unlimited list, isn't it, Aimee, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of the most common redaction mistakes that organisations make, and what can we learn from real world cases?
Well, over redaction we've already touched on, isn't it? So you're taking out too much, you're putting too many exemptions in there, which can lead to the ICO knocking on your door to have a look at what you're doing, not having that defined kind of structured approach to it that all of your teams are going by. That can be a real problem.
Yeah, and making sure all the versions got the same redaction on. The biggest thing I find, and biggest pain for me, and I don't know whether it's the same for Aimee, is when you are reading a bundle of documentation for a client, you read something, you think, sure, I've already read that. You get a bit of a memory, think, oh, I'm sure I've read that. So you start to look back, and you've got to be really careful because you may end up with a duplicate in there somewhere. And what you don't want to do is redact them completely differently. Yeah. So that can be tough too. So, failure to redact everything sufficiently, make sure your naming convention's correct. So when you're looking at what you've got in your bundle to disclose, you can go, actually, I think that's the same email as I've already read. And you can go back and find it and say, yes, it's a duplicate. I can get rid of it from the bundle. Because what you don't want is the same email with a different thing redacted, because that just looks really unprofessional as well. And you might leave something in that can help them to identify something later on in terms of context. And over-redacting for things that aren't even personal data. The amount of times clients have had a go at something and shared it with me and they've just taken everything out. And I'm like, well, but how does the person have a clue what you're talking about on this page now because there's only one sentence in the middle? Well, that's not anything to do with them. But they were part of that. They're in there, so it is something to do with them. So give them some context. Mm-hmm. You can leave that little bit in. And again, it comes down to what's the risk if you leave that context in.
Yeah. I think one of the other things is applying those redactions properly using the right softwares. And we've seen a number of cases where Excel sheets have been sent out with the tabs or the columns hidden. And that's easy to be unhidden, and therefore all of those names and whatever that are in the Excel spreadsheet can then be discovered. But also if you're using the wrong type of software, like you're using Word to put black boxes over and you don't save it properly, then those black boxes can be removed and that data can be unhidden. So you have to use the right tools to put a permanent redaction over that data so that it can't be discovered when it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Re-identifying data is an offence under the GDPR as well. So you've got to be really careful that you are locking it down so that you're not allowing someone else to reverse the work you've done on it and be able to re-identify. And there are some clever tools out there to do that. So you've got to be really careful. When we Adobe everything, don't we? We PDF everything, we lock it down, to make sure that it can't be unredacted. I mean, it doesn't happen so much these days, but historically, when we were doing paper copies, because most people want electronic copies now, it's easier to find something, it's easier to sift. But back in the old days, we would be printing off paperwork and we'd be highlighting it with black pen. And the number of times that was sent out to a data subject, and the minute you hold the page up to the light, you can still see the words underneath it. It was a common mistake. And then you happen to go back to the photocopy it through to make that black line solid so you can't identify. Thank goodness those days are gone, because the paper burden was enormous. I'm going to have to send them out by special delivery as well. It used to cost a fortune for organisations, but at least with an electronic copy, the data subject can do a Control F and look for what they're looking for, because often they are looking for something specific within that, aren't they, Aimee? Yeah. So it makes it easier. But yeah, redaction's tricky, and there is no rule book for that. It's knowing the framework that you work within in terms of the exemptions, what should and what shouldn't go, maybe taking the advice of other colleagues if you've got them, getting as much training as you can. And then it's just practice makes perfect, really.
Yeah. And the finer details. So you're not just the to from boxes, but you've got headers and footers and signatures and the metadata that all sit, that can end up being hidden or not noticed when you're doing the redaction. So it's just about looking at those finer points. And as you said, PDF it. So any Excel spreadsheets that we do, it's PDF'd so that anything that is hidden, it can't be undone.
one of the biggest things I see regularly, which always makes me smile, is that we redact all of these documents. So we have, let's say, 50 emails to redact. We redact all the emails, we lock it all down, and then you start looking at the disclosure, and actually the email title might have someone else's name in it. That happens all the time. And it's so commonly missed. So it could say Rachael Salter's sickness days off. And that could be the title of the email. And, you may have redacted Rachael Salter all the way through that email, but you've left my name in the title. So actually it tells everybody who's reading it exactly whose information it is. Common mistakes like that. That's what trip people up.
Yeah.
Silly little mistakes.
So finally, can you just share some practical steps that organisations can take to improve the quality and defensibility of their redactions?
Process. Have the strongest, solidest, most reliable process that is transparent. It's got practical steps. It will help your team to do those. It will help you justify what you do when you need to the ICO. It's consistent and it's updated. That's your starting point. That's your starting point in having that solid handbook.
Yeah, agree as well as an organisation, what you are likely to redact out of something. So have a standardised approach to that. So every DSAR is consistent, because often as well, when someone puts in a subject access request, let's say that an organisation is going through a restructure and individuals are being made redundant on the back of, a change to a team. You'll often find the first person puts in a subject access request, and then another person will, and then another person will, because they talk and they all find out that they're entitled to have this information. And perhaps what they're looking for is the reason why they weren't selected for a role, or perhaps why their role has been made redundant. What you need to have is consistency, because those people are going to talk to each other. They're all going to get their DSARs. They're going to sit and have a chat around it. And what you need to be sure is that all three of them are treated the same, and that the redaction's treated the same. And so actually agreeing that in advance is really important as well. Training your staff, so important. The people that do this, give them the time to learn it properly, because it's so important. It's so costly when it goes wrong. Get them on whatever courses you can to get them trained, to give them the ability, the tools to do a really good job. That's really important too.
And if you've got the space and time to do so, those get-togethers regularly, so that they can get their heads together and go through those case studies and understand what each other are doing, and have that consistent approach reviewed regularly, can really help.
And we've touched on Adobe, for example, but there are loads and loads of tools out there for doing redaction of documentation. Make sure just doing it in Word and putting black lines through things is just not enough. And with clever tools that can be unredacted again, and people can be re-identified from it. So be really careful that you're investing in something that's good and useful and got good reviews, and it works for you. That's really important. It will, and while some of these tools seem expensive in the outset, in the long run, it save you millions, right? So it's important.
I'd also say that one of the really important ones is your retention policy, as Rachel's already touched on, is that if you're keeping data and you're not abiding by the data minimization principle, and it's there for a silly amount of time that is unnecessary, then that's only going to put more strain, effort and cost to you when it comes to these DSARs.
Yeah, and on the back of that as well. So whilst it's going to be a drain on you from a DSAR perspective, because you've over recorded information for too long, if that case ends up at the ICO and the ICO start looking at it, they'll be like, well, why have you still got information that's this old? And actually what you might find is a DSAR goes horribly wrong, but you're now about to be audited by the ICO because you breached a principle, because your data's out of date, inaccurate, stored too long, no longer necessary for your business purpose, and you've got yourself a problem. So it has a knock-on effect. And we're not just saying get rid of data because it reduces the DSAR burden. Get rid of data because actually, perhaps if you no longer need it, you're breaching a principle. So, there are other reasons why it's important.
Yeah, I was about to say is the two pair of eyes to do one review and then a second review, especially for your more complex cases or your HR ones where there's a bit more data or a bit more contentious data, is that make sure that you've got a layered approach to that review process to ensure that everything goes out right. Yeah. And then you've got your regular training for your staff as well that are doing that, so that, again, you're all on the same page.
And obviously, if you get something that's difficult, That's what we're here for. We have a number of clients who manage their DSARs in-house until something terrible comes along, something big, either big as in it's going to blow up, or big as in the volume of it. And we have a number of clients who go, do you know what, we just can't handle this one. Can you guys take care of it? And sometimes actually it's better for an organization to do that because it shows independency, because we're nothing to do with that client. We don't know these people that are involved. We're approaching it purely in a professional manner, and we're taking it on face value. So we're reviewing the material, and we're processing it and dealing with the disclosure as we should, without having any imbalance. So if there's a HR incident and someone in HR is the person who does the redaction, if they have to redact something that's got them in it, it can become a little bit tricky. And the data subject's likely to say, well, hang on, that's not really a fair process, because that's the person I'm making a complaint about. Of course, they're going to redact what they said about me because it's not a fair process. So coming to us, or an organization like us, we manage this internally for a number of clients who come and say, please take this one from me, save me this headache, and we deal with it. So there is always a chance to ask someone for some professional help if you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you've got a nasty, contentious, complex case, and the data subject's going to accuse you of bias, they're more likely to go to the ICO when you do your disclosure, because they're going to be unhappy with the disclosure. They're already unhappy with you. They're going to carry on going through that. Whereas if you've got that independence and a different body doing it for you, then they can't put that accusation in.
We get that a lot, don't we, Amy? We get that a lot. We want someone to take this one from us because it's too contentious. It's easy for us to step aside and say, actually, we've outsourced this because that's the professional way to do it. Happens a lot.
Amazing. Thank you very much, guys. So if any of our listeners would like to ask Rachel and Aimee a question in a future episode, you can just follow the link in the description for this episode, or you can just pop it in the comments. So thank you so much for your time today, guys. Really amazing and insightful discussion as always. And thank you everyone for listening today. We will see you next time. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.